The cleaning lady was hired to clean a millionaire's mansion. But when she saw the basement, she started screaming. That's where her mother locked her up before selling her at age 6. Sarah Coleman's hands were raw, despite the rubber gloves. 6 hours of scrubbing other people's toilets had that effect. She peeled the yellow gloves off with a wince and massaged her calloused palms, checking her watch. Almost 5. Time to head to her second gig of the day. You hanging in there? Sarah, Diane from the agency called as Sarah shouldered her worn backpack. Always do, Sarah replied with a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. At 30, Sarah had mastered the art of invisibility. People's gazes slid past her as if she were part of the furniture. Just another cleaning lady in faded jeans and a shapeless sweater. It suited her fine. Flying under the radar was safer than the alternative. The bus ride to the wealthy part of town took 40 minutes. Sarah spent it staring out the window, her reflection ghosting against the glass. Dark circles underscored her hazel eyes that had seen too much, too young. She absent-mindedly traced the thin scar running along her wrist, a permanent reminder of a past she couldn't remember completely, but couldn't entirely forget. The therapist she'd seen through the state program called it selective amnesia, her brain's way of protecting itself from trauma. What Sarah did remember came in fragments. Cold stone walls, ornate iron bars, and her mother's face saying she'd be back soon. The memory always ended there, like a film reel snipped mid-scene. The agency had called yesterday about a last-minute job. A wealthy client needed temporary help with a renovation cleanup. Double the usual pay. Sarah hadn't hesitated. The bus dropped her off at the base of a long, winding driveway as she hiked up toward the mansion. The back of her neck prickled uncomfortably. Something about the place seemed oddly familiar, though she was certain she'd never been here before. You must be Sarah, a middle-aged woman greeted her at the service entrance. Her severe bob and pressed uniform screamed, "Head housekeeper," though something in her eyes seemed slightly off, too watchful, too wary. I'm Susan Monroe, the house manager. Mr. Ortiz is away on business until tomorrow, so I'll show you what needs doing. Sarah nodded, following Susan through the sprawling mansion. The place was ridiculously huge, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers, the kind of wealth that made Sarah feel like she should apologize for breathing the same air. We're renovating the East Wing, Susan explained, her voice clipped and efficient. Construction dust has gotten everywhere. You'll start in the main areas, then work your way down to the basement storage rooms over the next few days. As they passed through a corridor lined with photos, Sarah paused. A framed newspaper article showed a handsome young man cutting a ribbon outside a children's shelter. The headline read, Ortiz Foundation opens 5th refuge for trafficking survivors. That's Mr. Brandon Ortiz, Susan said, noticing Sarah's interest. He's dedicated his fortune to helping children escape trafficking networks. Sarah's throat tightened. That's admirable. Susan's eyes narrowed slightly. Yes, he was rescued from such a network himself as a child. It made him who he is today. Sarah nodded, feeling a strange kinship with her unseen employer. She understood reinvention better than most. After Susan left, Sarah worked methodically through the main floor, cleaning with the efficiency of someone who'd spent most of her life erasing evidence of her own existence. The mansion was eerily quiet, save for the distant sound of Susan's heels clicking somewhere upstairs and the occasional murmur of the elderly cook, Helen, in the kitchen. Around 8, Sarah was putting away her supplies when a wave of dizziness hit her. The cleaning chemicals? Probably. She steadied herself against a wall, but as her fingers touched the cool surface, a memory flashed through her mind. Small fingers scratching at stone, desperate to leave a mark, to prove she existed. She yanked her hand back as if burned, heart pounding. Just another flashback. They came sometimes, triggered by random things. A certain smell, a particular shade of light, the sound of a heavy door closing. You all right, dear? Helen's voice startled her. The cook stood in the doorway, her weathered face creased with concern. Fine, Sarah mumbled. Just tired. Helen studied her for a moment too long. You look familiar. Have you worked here before? No. Never, Sarah said quickly. Just have one of those faces, I guess. She escaped to the bus stop, unsettled. The mansion had triggered something, but she couldn't place what. That night, her dreams were worse than usual. She was a child again, counting days by scratching marks on a stone wall, waiting for her mother who never came back, listening to the footsteps that meant pain was coming. Sarah woke gasping, sheets twisted around her legs like restraints. Her tiny studio apartment felt claustrophobic, despite being barely bigger than a prison cell. The irony wasn't lost on her, how she'd escaped one kind of confinement only to build another around herself. Her phone lit up with a text from the agency. Client requested you specifically for next 3 days. Double rate still applies. Confirm. Sarah hesitated, remembering the strange familiarity of the mansion, the flashback it had triggered. But double pay meant she could finally get her car fixed. One less link in the chain of dependencies that kept her vulnerable. Confirmed, she texted back. The second day passed without incident. She cleaned the upper floors, including a library with more books than Sarah had seen outside a public building. One entire shelf was dedicated to books on human trafficking, psychology, and trauma recovery. Sarah ran her fingers over the spines, wondering what kind of rich guy spent his free time reading about the darkest aspects of humanity. That night, Sarah dreamed of a small window with ornate iron bars shaped like vines. When she woke, the image stayed with her. Unusually vivid, on the third day, Susan intercepted her at the service entrance. "We need the basement cleaned today. It's mostly storage, but Mr. Ortiz will be using it as a temporary office while the renovations finish." She handed Sarah a ring of keys. "The last door on the left needs special attention. It hasn't been opened in years." As Sarah descended the stone steps to the basement, a familiar scent hit her. Musty stone and something else. Something that made her heart race with instinctive fear. She faltered on the steps, gripping the railing as another wave of dizziness washed over her. "Just clean the rooms and leave," she told herself firmly. "Don't make this weird." The basement was a maze of storage rooms filled with expensive furniture draped in sheets, like elegant ghosts frozen in time. Sarah worked her way methodically toward the last door on the left, fighting the growing unease building in her stomach when she finally reached it. The large brass key trembled in her hand. Something about this door terrified her, though she couldn't explain why. Sarah took a deep breath and pushed the key into the lock. The door swung open onto darkness. Sarah's hand fumbled along the wall until she found the light switch. A single bulb flickered to life, casting weak yellow light across the room. Her breathing quickened as details emerged from the shadows. Stone walls, a narrow cot pushed against one corner, and there, exactly as in her dream, a small window with ornate iron bars shaped like vines. "No," she whispered, backing away. "No, no, no." Her shoulder blades hit the door frame as her mind spiraled into panic. This room, she knew. This room. The scratches on the far wall. Those were hers, made by her own small fingernails as she'd counted days in captivity. The smell hit her then, full force. Sandalwood. Her knees buckled as memories erupted like a broken dam. A man's heavy cologne as he unlocked the door. The sound of his breathing. Her own silent tears as she huddled in the corner, praying to disappear. Sarah didn't realize she was screaming until her throat burned raw. Her vision tunneled, the room spinning as she collapsed to the stone floor, her body instinctively curling into the protective ball she'd once used to make herself smaller, less noticeable. "Hey, what's happening? Are you okay?" A man's voice cut through her panic. Unfamiliar but urgent. Sarah scrambled backward like a cornered animal, her hands raised defensively. "Don't touch me." "I won't," the man said, keeping his distance. "I promise I won't come closer. Just tell me what's wrong." Through tear-blurred vision, Sarah saw a tall figure silhouetted in the doorway, not the shadowy monster from her memories, but a younger man with concerned eyes. "This room," she choked out. I was kept here as a child." The man's face drained of color. "What? That's impossible." "The window," Sarah pointed with a trembling hand. "Those iron vines, I used to stare at them for hours, imagining they were growing, that someday they'd break and I could escape." Her voice broke. "And there," she gestured to the wall. "Those scratches, I made those. One for each day." She watched the stranger approach the wall, his movements careful as if afraid to disturb evidence at a crime scene. He ran his fingers over the crude markings, then turned back to her, visibly shaken. "I'm Brandon Ortiz," he said quietly. "This is my house, or at least it has been for the past 5 years." Sarah struggled to her feet, legs still unsteady. "I need to leave." "Wait, please." Brandon held up his hands. "If what you're saying is true, I need to understand this." He hesitated. "I bought this place after my adoptive father died. I never knew about anything like this." Before Sarah could respond, footsteps echoed on the stone stairs. Susan appeared in the doorway, her composed demeanor slipping when she saw them. "Mr. Ortiz, I didn't expect you back until..." Her eyes darted to Sarah, then to the room, widening in unmistakable panic. "What's going on here?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Brandon said, his voice hardening. "Sarah says she was kept prisoner in this room as a child." Susan's hand flew to her throat. "That's absurd. This was just a storage room your father used it for wine storage before the proper cellar was built." "Then explain the barred window," Brandon challenged. "And these marks on the wall." Susan's gaze never met Sarah's directly. "Old houses have all sorts of oddities, Mr. Ortiz. The window was likely for ventilation, and those marks could be from anything. Perhaps the previous owners kept dogs down here." Sarah's shock gave way to a slow-burning rage. "Dogs don't scratch tallies." Susan's eyes flashed with something. Fear, warning. "I think the young lady is confused. Perhaps the cleaning chemicals." "I'm not confused," Sarah interrupted, her voice finding its strength. "I was 8 years old. I was kept in this room for weeks after being taken from my mother. I remember the man who kept me here wore sandalwood cologne. I can smell it right now like it's soaked into these walls." Brandon looked stricken. "My father wore sandalwood cologne." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Susan seemed to be calculating something behind her carefully neutral expression. "Mr. Ortiz?" she finally said. "This is clearly upsetting for everyone. Perhaps we should continue this conversation upstairs, where it's more comfortable." "No," Brandon said firmly. "I want to hear everything right here." Sarah hugged herself, suddenly cold despite the stuffiness of the small room. "There were other children too. I could hear them sometimes, through the walls. We weren't allowed to talk to each other, but at night, when he was gone, we would tap messages." Her voice caught. "One girl, Megan, she was in the room next door. She showed me how to communicate in code. She was older, maybe 12. She tried to escape once. I never heard her again after that." Brandon paced the small room, running his hands through his hair. "This is insane. My father was Charles Ortiz. He was a respected businessman. He adopted me when I was 10, after I was rescued from a trafficking operation." He stopped, staring at the barred window. "He was the one who saved me. Or so you thought," Sarah said quietly. Susan made a small, distressed sound. "Mr. Ortiz, this is preposterous. Your father was a good man. This woman is clearly disturbed." "Stop it." "Susan!" Brandon snapped. "Look at her. She's terrified. Not crazy." Sarah met Brandon's gaze, seeing the conflict there, the desperate need to deny warring with the dawning horror of recognition. "How did you escape?" he asked softly. Sarah closed her eyes, reaching for fragments of memory that had eluded her for years. "There was a new guard, younger than the others. He left the door unlocked one night. I ran until I couldn't anymore. Someone found me on the highway. A trucker, I think, after that. It's mostly police stations and foster homes." Brandon turned to Susan, who stood rigid in the doorway. "Did you work for my father when he first bought this house?" "I've been with the Ortiz household for over 20 years, Susan answered carefully. "Then you knew," Brandon said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You knew what this room was." Susan's face remained impassive, but Sarah caught the slight tremor in her hands. "I look after the house, Mr. Ortiz. Your father's. Business matters were not my concern." "Get out," Brandon told her, barely containing his anger. "Go upstairs. We'll discuss this later." After Susan's footsteps faded, Brandon turned back to Sarah. "I'm so sorry," he said, looking lost. "I don't know what to say. If my father did this to you, to others." He broke off, struggling with the implications. Sarah moved toward the door on unsteady legs. "I need some air." Brandon nodded, following her out of the room. "Of course, whatever you need." As they climbed the stairs together, Sarah felt the weight of 2 decades of buried trauma pressing against her chest. Part of her wanted to run and never look back, but another part, the part that had scratched those marks into the wall, desperate to be remembered, couldn't leave. Not yet. Not until she uncovered the full truth of what happened in the mansion with the iron vines. In the ornate kitchen, Helen silently placed a steaming mug of tea in front of Sarah. The elderly cook's weathered hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were steady with a knowing look that made Sarah wonder how much she had witnessed over the years. "Chamomile," Helen said softly. "Good for the nerves." Brandon paced the length of the marble island, his reflection distorted in its polished surface. He'd barely spoken since they'd left the basement, his face locked in an expression of stunned disbelief. "I built my entire life around his legacy," he finally said, his voice hollow. "The foundation, the shelters, all of it was to honor what I thought he stood for." He stopped pacing and braced his hands against the counter. What if everything was a lie? Sarah wrapped her fingers around the warm mug, letting the heat ground her in the present. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we know the least. "Did you ever go to the police?" "After you escaped." She took a careful sip before answering. "I tried. I was 8, traumatized, with fragments of memories. I couldn't tell them where I'd been held or who had taken me. Just a big house and a man who smelled like trees. They found no record of a Linda Coleman with a missing daughter named Sarah." Her mouth twisted. "They thought I was making it up. Some foster kid desperate for attention." Brandon's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his frown deepening. Susan's requesting an urgent meeting to clarify the situation. He silenced the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. She can wait. A strange calm had settled over Sarah, the kind that sometimes follows extreme shock. "If Susan's worked here since your father's time, she knows something. The way she looked at me when she saw me in that room. It wasn't just surprise." Brandon studied her face. "You're not leaving, are you? Would you, if it were you?" He shook his head. "No. I'd need answers. Then you understand." Sarah set down her mug with quiet determination. "I've spent 22 years with pieces missing. For the first time, I have a real chance to put them together." Brandon's shoulders straightened, a decision visibly made. "I'll help you, whatever my father did. I need to know too." He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "We should start with that room. Document everything before Susan or anyone else can alter it." "She'd do that. I don't know anymore. I wouldn't have thought my father capable of—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Let's not take chances." They returned to the basement armed with Brandon's phone for photos and a notepad he'd grabbed from a drawer. The small room felt different now, less terrifying, more like a crime scene that needed processing. "The scratches," Sarah said, pointing to the wall. "There are 67 of them." Brandon photographed each section of marks. 67 days. His voice was tight. "You were held here for over 2 months." Sarah moved to the small, barred window, tracing the iron vines with her fingertip. "It was summer when I arrived. I remember because I could see lightning bugs through this window some nights." She closed her eyes, concentrating. But the trees were changing color towards the end. Fall. That could help establish a timeline. Brandon moved beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "What else do you remember?" Sarah knelt by the cot, running her hand along the wall behind it. "There was a loose stone here, Megan, the girl next door. She told me about it. We passed tiny notes sometimes." Her fingers found a slight indentation. "Here." Brandon helped her press against the stone. It didn't budge at first, then gave way with a scrape. Behind it was a small, hollow space, just big enough to hide a child's treasures. "There's something in here," Sarah said, her heart quickening. She reached in and pulled out a small, filthy scrap of fabric. It was a doll. I made it from a torn piece of pillowcase." Her voice broke. "I called her Hope." Brandon's expression softened with compassion. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the hollow. Sarah nodded, moving aside. Brandon reached in, his longer arms able to probe deeper into the crevice. His fingers emerged with a folded piece of yellowed paper. "It wasn't mine," Sarah said, staring at it. "I never had paper or pencil." Brandon carefully unfolded it. Inside was a crude child's drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands. Below, in shaky block letters, were the words, "Sarah plus Megan friends." Megan must have left it for you, Brandon said quietly. Sarah took the paper with trembling hands, a sob catching in her throat. I thought I'd made her up. Sometimes, when the memories are so fragmented, you don't know what's real anymore. Now you have proof. Brandon's phone buzzed again. He checked it with an irritated glance. Susan, again. She's upstairs with her bags packed, saying she needs to take a leave of absence for family reasons. She's running, Sarah said sharply. We can't let her leave. They hurried upstairs to find Susan in the grand foyer, a small suitcase at her feet. The housekeeper's usually impeccable appearance was slightly disheveled, her eyes darting nervously between them. Mr. Ortiz, I've served your family faithfully for over 20 years. I need to attend to my sister in Phoenix. She's quite ill. That's funny, Brandon said coldly. In the 5 years I've known you, you've never mentioned a sister. Susan's lips thinned. There are many things we haven't discussed about our personal lives, like the fact that you knew children were being held prisoner in the basement. Sarah stepped forward. You knew what was happening to us. You must have. Did you bring us food, clean up after us, look the other way? Susan's facade cracked slightly, fear bleeding through her composed expression. You don't understand anything about that time or what was at stake. Her hand tightened on her suitcase handle. I did what I had to do. You're not going anywhere, Brandon said firmly. Not until we get answers. Susan's eyes narrowed. You can't keep me here against my will, Mr. Ortiz. No, but I can call the police, Brandon countered. I'm sure they'd be very interested in what we found in the basement. And in your sudden urgent need to leave town. A tense silence stretched between them. Finally, Susan's shoulders sagged in defeat. Fine, she said tightly. But not here, in the study privately. Brandon shook his head. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of Sarah. She's earned that much. Susan glanced at her watch, a gesture that struck Sarah as oddly specific. Very well, the study then, both of you. As they followed Susan down the hallway, Brandon leaned close to Sarah and whispered, I don't trust her. Neither do I, Sarah murmured back. She's hiding something bigger than just knowing about the room. The study was all leather and mahogany, a masculine sanctum designed to impress. Susan perched on the edge of a chair while Brandon and Sarah sat across from her on a leather sofa. I came to work for Charles Ortiz when I was very young, Susan began, her voice carefully controlled. I was in a vulnerable position. He offered me protection. Security. In exchange for what? Brandon pressed. Susan's eyes flicked to her watch again. In exchange for loyalty and discretion, your father, Charles, was a complicated man with powerful connections. I didn't ask questions about his business affairs. Trafficking children isn't a business affair, Sarah snapped. It's monstrous. Susan flinched as though struck. You don't think I know that? For the first time, raw emotion broke through her controlled exterior. But what could I have done? He owned me, just as surely as he owned this house. Brandon leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Why do you keep checking your watch? Are you expecting someone? Before Susan could answer, the distant sound of a door closing echoed through the house, followed by Helen's voice raised in apparent greeting. Susan's expression shifted, relief washing over her features. That will be Mr. Whitmore, she said, suddenly composed again. Charles's attorney. I took the liberty of calling him when this situation developed. Brandon stood, anger flashing across his face. You had no right. Susan met his gaze with newfound confidence. On the contrary, Mr. Ortiz, I have every right. You see, there are protocols in place for exactly this scenario. Protocols your father established long ago. Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine. Whatever game Susan was playing, the rules had just changed. Mr. Whitmore won't be joining us. Helen's voice rang out as she appeared in the doorway. The elderly cook stood with surprising authority, her slight frame somehow filling the space. In her hand was a set of car keys, which she dangled meaningfully. I told him Mr. Ortiz was out of the country and suggested he come back next week. He seemed quite confused about the urgent summons. The color drained from Susan's face. You had no right. I've worked in this house for 30 years. Helen cut in, her voice steely. I've served meals, cleaned messes, and kept my mouth shut. But I draw the line at watching you manipulate this boy again. She turned to Brandon. Your father's attorney is a snake. Whatever Susan told him to get him here, it wasn't the truth. Brandon looked between the two women, bewildered by this unexpected alliance. Helen, what do you know about all this? The cook's weathered face creased with sorrow. Enough to keep me awake at night for decades. She glanced at Sarah with something like recognition. I wasn't allowed in the basement ever, but I heard things. Saw things sometimes when they thought no one was looking. Susan stood abruptly. This is absurd. Helen's an old woman with an overactive imagination. Then explain this, Helen interrupted, pulling a small leather-bound book from her apron pocket. I found it the day after your father died, Mr. Ortiz, hidden in his study behind that false panel where he kept his expensive scotch. Brandon took the journal with visible trepidation. What is it? Open it, Helen said simply. The book's pages were filled with columns of numbers, dates and cryptic notations. Brandon flipped through it, his confusion evident. It's some kind of record, Sarah said, looking over his shoulder. Dates, transactions maybe. Susan made a sudden move toward the door, but Helen blocked her path with surprising agility. You're not going anywhere. Susan, not this time. You don't understand what you're doing, Susan hissed. There are people who will, what, kill me? Helen laughed bitterly. I'm 83 years old. I've already lived too long with what I know. Brandon continued studying the journal, his brow furrowed in concentration. Some of these are initials, I think, and these numbers could be... His voice faltered. Ages, prices. Sarah felt sick as understanding dawned. It's a ledger, for the children. The room fell silent as the implications settled over them. Brandon closed the book, his hands shaking slightly. We need to decipher this, he said finally. If my father was involved in trafficking, this could identify victims, maybe even the others in his network. Susan sank back into her chair, defeated. You have no idea what you're up against. Your father protected you from the truth, Brandon. Perhaps you should honor that. Honor, Brandon's voice rose. You think there's honor in what he did, in what he made me complicit in? He slammed the journal down on the desk. My foundation has helped hundreds of trafficking survivors, all while sitting on the very fortune that came from their suffering. Sarah placed a steadying hand on Brandon's arm. This ledger could help us find them. The real way to honor survivors is to bring them justice. Brandon took a deep breath, visibly calming himself. You're right. He turned to Helen. We'll need your help decoding this and keeping an eye on Susan. Helen nodded grimly. I've been watching Susan for years. Don't worry about that. They moved to the library, a vast room lined with bookshelves that reached the ceiling. Brandon spread the journal open on a large oak table, while Sarah pulled up a chair beside him. My father was meticulous, Brandon said, studying the entries. Everything is organized by date, but the rest is clearly in some kind of code. Sarah pointed to a recurring symbol that appeared next to certain entries. This mark. It looks like a vine. It's next to some of the names or initials, but not others. A designation of some kind, Brandon speculated. He flipped forward several pages. Wait, here's an entry from June 1995. He looked up at Sarah. How old are you? 30 now, so I would have been 8 in 2003. Brandon turned to entries from that year, scanning carefully. Here, August 2003, SC, 8, special interest, 75K. Could that be you? Sarah's throat constricted. SC, Sarah Coleman. Brandon continued reading. There's a vine symbol next to your entry, and another note, RH, request, hold indefinitely. RH, Sarah repeated, the initials stirring something in her memory. The man who came most often, the one who wasn't your father. I think he had red hair. Richard Hargrove, Brandon whispered, genuine horror crossing his face. He was my father's business partner. He still sits on the board of my foundation. Sarah felt the room tilt slightly. He's still out there, free. Not just free, respected, wealthy. Brandon's jaw clenched. He was at my side when we opened the last shelter, smiling for the cameras, talking about the tragedy of human trafficking. Helen brought them coffee and sandwiches as they worked. The afternoon stretching into evening, they created a makeshift system, cross-referencing dates and symbols, gradually piecing together the horrifying scope of Charles Ortiz's operation. The vine symbol, Brandon said after hours of work. "I think it indicates children kept here, in this house. The others were probably sent elsewhere." Sarah rubbed her tired eyes. "There are so many entries, dozens just in the year I was here. Over 2 decades of records," Brandon said quietly. "Hundreds of children." Susan remained isolated in a guest room. Under Helen's watchful eye, Brandon had confiscated her phone, finding multiple calls to numbers without names, just initials that matched some in the ledger. As midnight approached, Sarah's attention caught on a specific entry. BO 10, acquisition reversed, special project. She looked up at Brandon. BO Brandon Ortiz. This is dated just before your adoption. Brandon stared at the entry, his face ashen. "That's impossible. My father rescued me from a trafficking ring in Colombia. There was paperwork, a whole official process. Paperwork can be falsified by people with enough power," Sarah said gently. Brandon pushed away from the table abruptly, pacing the room. "No, that can't be right. Why would he traffic me and then adopt me?" Sarah had no answer, but an uncomfortable theory was forming in her mind, one too terrible to voice yet without more evidence. "There's something else we need to check," she said instead. "The room next to mine, where Megan was kept. We never looked there." Brandon nodded, clearly relieved to have a tangible action to take. "You're right. Let's go." The basement was even more oppressive at night. They moved past Sarah's former prison to the next door. It was locked, but Brandon had the master key. The door swung open to reveal a room nearly identical to Sarah's. Same cot, same barred window, same stone walls. Brandon shone his phone's flashlight across the room, illuminating scratches on the wall similar to those in Sarah's room. But among the tally marks were words, etched deeply into the stone. "They lie Charles the Moa Monster Brandon. Not son. Look in attic. Brandon not son." Brandon read aloud, his voice hollow. "What does that mean?" Sarah's eyes were fixed on the last line. "The attic. We need to check the attic." As they turned to leave, something glinted in the flashlight beam, something wedged between the cot and the wall. Brandon reached down and pulled out a small metal object. "It's a key," he said, examining it. "Old, but not for any door in this house that I know of." Sarah took it, turning it over in her palm. A memory surfaced. Megan's voice, whispering through the wall. "If we ever get out, look for the box with the butterfly. That's where the truth is." "I think I know what this opens," Sarah said. "We need to find a box with a butterfly." Brandon pocketed the key. "First, the attic, then we find that box." As they climbed the stairs back to the main house, Sarah felt a growing certainty that whatever they discovered next would shatter what remained of Brandon's world, and possibly remake her own. The mansion fell quiet as midnight passed. Helen had finally retired to her quarters after securing Susan in a guest room. The door locked from outside. Sarah and Brandon huddled at the kitchen island, planning their next move over cups of strong coffee. "The attic spans the entire east wing," Brandon explained, pulling up a floor plan on his tablet. "I've only been up there a few times. Mostly storage, old furniture, seasonal decorations." Sarah studied the blueprint. "Is there any part you haven't explored?" Brandon zoomed in on the far corner. "This section has a separate access point, a narrow staircase behind a door in the 3rd floor hallway. I always assumed it was just more storage." "That's where we need to look," Sarah said decisively. They moved through the sleeping house like ghosts, their footsteps muffled by plush carpeting. The 3rd floor hallway was lined with doors to unused guest rooms, their brass handles gleaming in the dim light. "Here," Brandon whispered, stopping before a narrow door that looked like a linen closet. The key turned with a resistant screech. A tight spiral staircase twisted upward into darkness. Brandon went first, illuminating the way with his phone's flashlight. The stairs creaked ominously with each step. The attic air was thick with dust and neglect. Brandon located a light switch, and a single bulb cast weak yellow light across the space. Unlike the rest of the immaculate mansion, this area seemed forgotten. Cobwebs draped from exposed rafters, and sheets covered bulky furniture shapes. "It would take days to search everything," Sarah murmured, surveying the cluttered space. "Then we focus on that section." Brandon pointed to the far corner, where the roof sloped down to meet the floor. Unlike the rest of the attic, This area seemed deliberately arranged. Stacked boxes creating a wall that sealed off the corner from view, they began moving boxes. Working silently side by side, the physical labor felt good to Sarah, a tangible problem she could solve with her hands, unlike the murky mysteries of her past. "Wait," Brandon said suddenly, pointing to the floorboards they'd exposed. "These are different." He was right. While most of the attic had unfinished pine planks, this section featured polished hardwood, as if it belonged to a different room entirely. "There's a seam here," Sarah said, tracing a thin line that formed a large rectangle in the floor. "I think it's a trap door." Brandon knelt beside her, his fingers searching for a handle. "There's no latch, no visible way to open it." Sarah sat back on her heels. "That's because it's not meant to be opened from this side." She examined the surrounding floorboards. "Look for anything unusual. A knot in the wood, a discolored plank." Brandon moved methodically around the perimeter, tapping and pressing. "Nothing seems... Wait." He paused at a board that appeared identical to the others. "This one sounds different." He pressed down on one end, and the opposite end lifted slightly. "A lever mechanism," Sarah said. "Press it all the way." Brandon applied firm pressure. With a soft click, a section of the trapdoor rose about an inch. Together, they lifted it, revealing a hidden staircase descending into darkness. "A secret room within a secret room," Brandon muttered. "My father was nothing if not thorough." The stairs led to a small windowless space directly beneath the attic. Unlike the dusty storage above, this room was clinically clean. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall, a desk with a computer occupied another, and a large corkboard dominated the third, covered with maps and photographs. "This is it," Sarah whispered. "The control center." Brandon stood frozen in the doorway, his face a mask of disbelief. "My father built all this right above my bedroom. All those years while I slept. He was up here." Sarah approached the corkboard, her heart hammering. Dozens of photographs were pinned there. Children of various ages, some candid shots, some posed for what looked like school pictures. Red lines connected some photos to locations on a map of the United States. "His network," she said softly. "All these children." Brandon moved to the filing cabinets, pulling open a drawer. Inside were folders labeled with initials and dates. "It's all here. Records of every transaction, every child." His voice cracked. "How could I not have known?" Sarah's attention caught on a photo near the center of the board. A girl about 8 years old with blonde hair and pigtails, standing in front of a modest apartment building. With trembling fingers, she unpinned it. "That's me," she whispered. "Outside our apartment in Cincinnati before I was taken." She turned the photo over. Written on the back was, "SC, Mother, Linda Coleman. Suitable acquisition." "They were watching you," Brandon said. "Planning it." Sarah returned to the photo board, scanning the faces more carefully. These children were targeted, not randomly snatched. Look at the notes. Family situations, routines, vulnerabilities. Brandon had moved to the computer, an older model covered in dust. "I doubt this still works. But the hard drive might be salvageable." While he examined the computer, Sarah continued her search, opening drawers in the desk. In the bottom drawer, partially hidden beneath stationery, she found a small wooden box with a butterfly inlaid in mother of pearl on its lid. "Brandon?" she called, her pulse quickening. "I found it, the butterfly box." He joined her as she placed it on the desk. The keyhole was tarnished with age, but the key from the basement room slid in perfectly. The lock turned with a satisfying click. Inside lay a stack of documents and a manila envelope. Sarah removed the envelope first, opening it to find photographs. Not of children this time, but of a young woman with striking features similar to her own. In several photos, the woman held a baby. Sarah's hands shook. "This is my mother, and me, as an infant." She turned one photo over. Written on the back was, "Linda and Sarah, 1995. "There's something else here," Brandon said, pulling out an official-looking document from the bottom of the box. "It's a birth certificate." He scanned it, his expression shifting to confusion. "It's yours, but..." "What?" Sarah pressed. "The father's name." Brandon looked up, his eyes wide. "It says Charles Ortiz." The room seemed to tilt around Sarah as the implications hit her. "No, that's not possible. Charles Ortiz was my adoptive father," Brandon finished. "But according to this, he was your biological father." Sarah sank into the desk chair, the document clutched in her hand. "He was the monster who kept me prisoner, who trafficked me. How could he be my father?" Brandon continued sorting through the papers, his movements increasingly agitated. "There's more. Medical records, DNA tests." He stopped suddenly, staring at a document in his hands. "Sarah, look at this." It was another birth certificate, dated 2 years after hers. The mother's name was Linda Coleman. The father's name was Charles Ortiz, and the child's name was Brandon James Coleman. "This can't be right," Brandon whispered. "I was adopted from Colombia. I have the papers." "False papers," Sarah said. The terrible theory she'd been forming now confirmed. "Brandon, I think we're siblings. Half-siblings at least," he corrected automatically, still staring at the birth certificate. "But why would he separate us? Why keep you prisoner and adopt me?" Sarah rifled through more papers until she found a handwritten letter in faded ink. "It's from my mother, our mother," she read aloud. "Charles, I'm begging you one last time. Let Sarah go. She's your daughter. I've done everything you asked. I've stayed silent about Brandon. No one knows he survived. Please, if there's any humanity left in you, don't hurt our children." Brandon took the letter, reading it himself as if he couldn't believe Sarah's words. "What does she mean, no one knows he survived?" Sarah's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The ledger entry, B.O., acquisition reversed, special project. You weren't rescued from a trafficking ring, you were in one, but then something changed. The terrible truth dawned on them simultaneously. "He trafficked his own son," Brandon said, his voice hollow, "then rescued me when he realized who I was, and kept me prisoner," Sarah added softly. "His own daughter." They sat in stunned silence, the weight of revelation pressing down on them. Outside, the first hints of dawn lightened the sky, casting long shadows through the attic windows above. "Susan knows," Sarah said finally. "She has to. The way she's been acting. The panic when she saw me. She knew exactly who I was." Brandon stood abruptly. "We need to talk to her now." As they gathered the documents into a pile, Sarah's gaze returned to the photo board. One picture stood out. A girl with fiery red hair and defiant green eyes. Written beneath it was a single word. "Escaped." "Megan," Sarah whispered, hope rising unexpectedly. She unpinned the photo. "She really did get away." Brandon placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "And she left clues for you to find the truth." Together, they left the hidden room, carrying the box and documents that would forever change their lives. The mansion around them, once a symbol of wealth and privilege, now revealed itself for what it truly was, a monument to monstrous secrets and broken families, and somewhere within its walls, Susan, or whatever her real name might be, held the key to the final pieces of the puzzle. The guest room where Susan was being kept had the deceiving comfort of expensive prison. Plush carpet, silk curtains, and a 4-poster bed, where she sat perched on the edge, her posture rigid. She looked up sharply when Brandon unlocked the door, Sarah following close behind. "You found it," Susan said. Not a question, but a resigned statement. The fight had drained from her, leaving something raw and vulnerable in its place. Brandon tossed the birth certificates onto the bed beside her. "Who are you, really?" Susan's fingers trembled as she touched the documents, like a penitent before sacred relics. "You know who I am." Her eyes finally met Sarah's directly. "You've always known, somewhere deep down." The room seemed to contract around Sarah as understanding crystallized. Mom. The word felt foreign on her tongue, a language she'd stopped speaking decades ago. "My name was Linda Coleman." "Susan," Linda confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had surgery, changed my appearance after everything. But yes, I'm your mother." Brandon remained standing, his body coiled with tension. "Explain. All of it now." Linda's hand moved unconsciously to the gold pendant at her throat. A nervous habit Sarah had noticed before, but now recognized with a jolt as familiar. A gesture from her earliest memories. "I met Charles when I was 23, Linda began. "He was charming, wealthy, established. I was a waitress with dreams of becoming a nurse. He swept me off my feet." A bitter smile twisted her lips. "Classic story, isn't it? Poor girl falls for rich man. Doesn't realize until too late what she's gotten herself into." "When did you learn what he really was?" Sarah asked, still standing in the doorway, afraid to come closer to this stranger wearing her mother's face. "After Sarah was born." Linda's eyes grew distant. "I found papers, photographs of children, photographs. When I confronted him, he didn't deny anything. He told me I belonged to him now, that my daughter belonged to him." She looked at Brandon. "I didn't know I was pregnant with you yet." Brandon paced the room like a caged animal. "So you just, what, accepted that your husband was trafficking children?" "No." Linda's voice cracked. "I tried to run. I packed a bag for Sarah and me, but he caught us. He hurt me badly that night, made me understand there was no escape." Her fingers traced an invisible scar along her collarbone. "A week later, I found out I was pregnant again." Sarah felt dizzy with the implications. "You stayed with him, even knowing what he was." "I stayed because he gave me no choice." Linda shot back, a flash of the old Susan's steel showing through. "He said if I tried to leave again, he would kill the baby, and to ensure my cooperation, he took you, Sarah, removed you from our home and brought you here, to his special collection." Brandon made a sound of disgust. His own daughter. Charles didn't see people as people, not even his own blood. Everyone was a commodity, a pawn, or a tool. Linda's composure cracked further. "When you were born, Brandon, he took you away immediately, told me you had died. I mourned you for years." "But I didn't die," Brandon said. "No, I found out the truth years later. He had put you into his trafficking network." Linda's voice dropped. "Something went wrong, a police raid on one of his sites. You were among the children recovered, though no one knew who you really were." "Acquisition reversed?" Sarah quoted from the ledger. Linda nodded. "When Charles realized his biological son had been rescued, he saw an opportunity. He arranged to adopt you, a philanthropic gesture, the wealthy businessman saving a child from a fate worse than death, the perfect cover, while his own daughter remained his prisoner," Brandon said. The words like acid. "Why did you stay?" Sarah demanded. "After Brandon was adopted, why remain here working for the monster who destroyed our family?" Linda's eyes flashed with a mother's ferocity. "Because he threatened to sell you permanently if I didn't. And once Brandon was here, I had 2 children to protect." Her shoulders sagged. "I became Susan Monroe. I stayed close, keeping my children as safe as I could in an impossible situation." "Safe?" Sarah's voice rose incredulously. "I was locked in a basement for months, and it would have been years if I hadn't helped you escape." Linda shot back. The room fell silent. "That was you," Sarah whispered. "The guard who left the door unlocked." "There was no young guard," Linda said quietly. "I drugged Charles's drink that night, took his keys, and left your door unlocked. I couldn't go with you. He would have hunted us both down, but I gave you a chance." Her eyes filled with tears. "I prayed every day you'd made it somewhere safe." Brandon sank into a chair, his face ashen. "All these years, my foundation, my mission to save trafficking victims, it was built on blood money. The very fortune I've used came from selling children." "You didn't know," Linda said gently. "I should have," he snapped. "The signs were there. I just didn't want to see them." Sarah moved further into the room. Studying her mother's altered face, the surgeries had changed her features significantly, but now that Sarah knew the truth, she could see glimpses of her mother in certain expressions, in the way she held herself. "The photograph," Sarah said. "The one of us outside our apartment. They were watching us before I was taken." Linda nodded. "Richard Hargrove, Charles's partner, had been surveilling us for weeks. Charles wanted to make sure I had no support system, nowhere to run." Brandon leaned forward. "Why did Charles keep records of everything? The ledger, the hidden room. It's like he documented his own crimes." "Power," Linda said simply. Information was power to Charles. Knowledge about his associates gave him leverage. Many powerful men were involved in his network. Politicians, judges, business leaders. Their participation was his insurance policy. "And after he died?" Sarah asked. Why did you stay then? Partly to protect Brandon from the truth, Linda admitted. And partly, I was waiting. For what? Brandon demanded. For you, Linda said, looking at Sarah. I knew someday you might find your way back here. I've spent 20 years preparing for that possibility. Sarah shook her head in disbelief. So when the agency called about sending me here, I couldn't refuse without raising suspicions, Linda explained. Some of Charles's associates still keep tabs on this house. On Brandon. They think I'm a loyal servant keeping their secrets. Who else knows? Brandon asked. About our true relationship. About my father's operation. Helen knows some, not all. Richard Hargrove knows everything. He was Charles's right hand. There are others in the network whose names are in that hidden room. Linda's voice hardened. Powerful people who would kill to keep these secrets buried. Sarah moved to the window, watching the sunrise paint the manicured grounds. Gold, the beautiful estate now seemed like an elaborate facade, a pretty shell concealing rot. What do we do now? She asked, turning back to face her newfound family, her brother she'd never known, and the mother who had both abandoned and saved her. We have evidence, Brandon said firmly. The ledger, the documents, the hidden room. We go to the authorities. Linda laughed, a hollow sound. You think the local police aren't on the payroll, or that a judge won't bury this case? Charles's network runs deep, Brandon. It survived his death for a reason. Then we find someone we can trust, Sarah insisted. Federal authorities, journalists, someone outside the local power structure. A noise from downstairs interrupted them, the distant sound of breaking glass. Linda froze, her eyes widening in alarm. They're here, she whispered. Who? Brandon demanded. Hargrove's security team. Linda stood quickly, moving to the door. They must have been alerted when you accessed the hidden room. There are silent alarms, security protocols I don't even know about. Sarah felt her hard-won courage begin to crack. They're coming for us. Linda's face transformed, the meek housekeeper vanishing as a mother's protective instinct took over. Get the evidence. There's a tunnel from the basement to the neighboring property. We need to move now. As they hurried from the room, Sarah caught Linda's arm. Why should we trust you? After everything, Linda met her daughter's gaze unflinchingly. Because despite everything, I never stopped being your mother. And mothers protect their children, even when the choices are impossible. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the main staircase. We don't have time for a family therapy session, Brandon hissed, already moving toward the back stairs. We need to go. As Sarah followed, she realized they had crossed an invisible threshold. Whatever came next, the carefully constructed lies of the past had crumbled. All that remained was the raw, uncomfortable truth, and the question of what they would build from its ruins. They moved through the mansion's hidden veins, service corridors and back staircases designed to keep the help invisible. Linda led the way with the confident steps of someone who had spent decades memorizing escape routes. What about Helen? Sarah whispered as they descended toward the kitchen. Helen has her own hiding places, Linda replied without slowing. She survived in this house longer than any of us. The kitchen was empty, breakfast preparations not yet begun. Linda headed straight for the pantry, pushing aside a shelf of canned goods to reveal a narrow door. The tunnel entrance is in the basement, she explained. But we need supplies first. The hidden cabinet contained emergency provisions. Flashlights, water bottles, a first aid kit, and most surprisingly, a handgun that Linda tucked into her waistband without hesitation. Brandon stared at her. You've been planning this for a while. Since the day Charles died, Linda confirmed, handing them each a flashlight. When you inherited everything, I knew it was just a matter of time before the truth surfaced. The sounds of systematic searching grew louder above them. Heavy footsteps, doors being opened, muffled voices. Who exactly are these people? Sarah asked as they moved toward the basement stairs. Former military, mostly. Richard calls them his security consultants. But they're glorified cleanup crew. Linda's voice was grim. They eliminate problems, retrieve sensitive information, maintain the network's integrity. The basement felt different now. Not a place of childhood terror, but the first step toward escape. Linda moved confidently to a wine rack at the far end, one Sarah hadn't noticed before. With practiced ease, she removed bottles from a specific pattern, revealing a keypad. She entered a code, and the entire rack slid sideways with a soft hydraulic hiss. Charles wasn't the only one with secrets, she said at Brandon's surprised expression. I've had 20 years to learn this house's hidden pathways. The tunnel beyond was surprisingly modern, concrete lined with emergency lighting that activated as they entered. Linda sealed the entrance behind them. This leads to the guest house on the eastern property line, she explained as they jogged through the passageway. From there, we can reach the service road without being seen. Sarah clutched the butterfly box containing their evidence, while Brandon carried the ledger and computer hard drive they'd removed from the hidden room. The weight of decades of crimes pressed against her chest with each step. Why did you keep all this? Sarah asked her mother. If you wanted to protect us, why not destroy the evidence years ago? Linda glanced back. Because evidence is the only leverage we have against men like Richard Hargrove. Destroying it wouldn't stop them. It would just leave us defenseless. The tunnel ended at a ladder leading to a trapdoor. Linda climbed first, pushing it open cautiously before signaling them to follow. They emerged in a gardening shed attached to a modest guest house. No one's used this place in years, Linda explained, moving to the window to scan the grounds. The regular security team doesn't even know it exists. Brandon set the hard drive on a dusty table. I don't understand. If you've had access to all this evidence, why haven't you used it before now? Against whom? Linda challenged. The local police chief who visited your father monthly. The judge who helped arrange paperwork for the adoptions. The congressman whose campaigns were funded by Charles's donations. She shook her head. I needed absolute proof, and I needed someone trustworthy to take it to. And now you have us, Sarah said quietly. Linda's expression softened. Now I have my children back, after 20 years of pretending to be someone else, watching Brandon grow up from a distance, wondering if Sarah was even alive. Her voice cracked. I never thought I'd see this day. The moment of vulnerability passed quickly as Linda returned to tactical planning. We need to get to Chicago. I have a safety deposit box there with additional evidence. DNA tests proving Charles's paternity of both of you. Financial records showing the full extent of the network. Why Chicago? Brandon asked. Because that's where Federal Agent Whitaker is based, Linda replied. He's been investigating Richard Hargrove for years, but he's never had enough evidence to move against someone so powerful. He's the only law enforcement contact I trust. Sarah struggled to reconcile this strategic, resourceful woman with the frightened mother from her fragments of memory. How do you know him? I've been anonymously feeding him information for years, Linda admitted. Small pieces, nothing that would lead back to us. Building his trust slowly. Brandon paced the small room. I have to process all this. My entire life has been a lie. My mission, my foundation. Everything I've built has been on a false premise. He turned to Linda, anger flashing in his eyes. Why didn't you tell me the truth when my father died? Why keep up this charade? Because Charles's death didn't end the threat, Linda said firmly. If anything, it made Richard Hargrove more dangerous. He needed to believe that you remained ignorant, that I remained loyal. So you let me continue working alongside my father's co-conspirator. Brandon's voice rose. Do you know how many fundraisers I've hosted with Richard by my side? How many times I've welcomed him into my home, into my confidence? I did what I thought was necessary to keep you safe, Linda replied, not backing down. Would knowing the truth earlier have changed anything? Or would it have just put you in danger before we had enough evidence to protect ourselves? That wasn't your decision to make. It was the only decision I could make, Linda shot back. I'd already lost Sarah. I couldn't lose you too. Sarah stepped between them. This isn't helping. We need to focus on getting to Chicago with the evidence. Brandon's jaw worked as he struggled to contain his anger, but he nodded. You're right. Recriminations can wait. Linda moved to a cabinet, retrieving car keys. There's an unmarked vehicle in the shed behind this cottage. We'll take back roads to minimize security camera exposure. As Linda outlined their route, Sarah studied her brother's face. The revelation of their true relationship had fundamentally altered how she saw him. Hours ago, there had been a different kind of connection forming between them, something that now made her stomach twist with discomfort. Brandon caught her gaze. What is it? Nothing, she said quickly. Just processing everything. Understanding crossed his face. Yeah, it's a lot. He hesitated. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're my sister, even with everything else. Finding you feels like finding a missing piece of myself." The simple honesty of his statement broke through Sarah's carefully maintained walls. Tears threatened for the first time since this nightmare began. "I always wondered if I had family somewhere. Real family." Linda watched their exchange with pained longing, a mother witnessing a connection she'd been denied for decades. She turned away, busying herself with preparations, giving them space for this fragile new understanding. "We should move soon," she said finally. "Richard's men will figure out we've fled the main house and expand their search," as they prepared to leave. Sarah touched the butterfly box containing the evidence of their shattered past. "What happens after Chicago? After we expose the network?" Neither Linda nor Brandon had an answer ready. "One step at a time," Brandon said finally. "First, we get justice for all the children in that ledger." Linda's expression hardened with resolve. "And then Richard Hargrove and everyone connected to him pays for what they've done." Sarah nodded, finding unexpected strength in her newfound family. 3 survivors bound not just by blood, but by a shared mission to expose the darkness that had shaped them all as they slipped out into the early morning light. Sarah cast one last glance at the mansion looming against the sky. For the first time, she saw it clearly, not as a house of horrors, but as a fortress whose secrets were finally crumbling. And leading the charge against it were the very people it had tried to destroy. The unmarked sedan hugged the back roads as Linda drove with practiced precision. Sarah sat beside her in the passenger seat, the butterfly box clutched tightly on her lap, while Brandon monitored the road behind them from the back seat. The countryside blurred past, rolling fields and scattered farmhouses bathed in the soft glow of early morning. "I don't see any pursuit," Brandon said, lowering his binoculars. "But that doesn't mean they're not tracking us somehow." Linda nodded grimly. "Richard has resources we can't imagine. We need to assume we're being followed." Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen displayed agency. Diane checking in about her next assignment. "Should I answer?" she asked. "No," Linda replied immediately. "Throw it out the window. They can track it." "All our phones," Brandon agreed, already powering his down and removing the battery. "And my watch too. It has GPS." They discarded their electronics along different stretches of road, a digital breadcrumb trail leading nowhere. The car fell into silence, each passenger lost in private reckonings with the truth. "I don't understand one thing," Sarah said finally. "If Charles was willing to traffic his own children, why did he keep it a secret? Why bother with the elaborate adoption story for Brandon?" Linda's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Appearances. Charles built his entire public persona around respectability. Human trafficking was profitable, but it had to remain his shadow business. And the perfect cover for a trafficker is a philanthropist dedicated to fighting trafficking," Brandon added bitterly. No one would suspect the man opening shelters for rescued children. They stopped at a rural gas station to refuel and change vehicles. Linda had cash and identification documents hidden in the car's spare tire well, remnants of an escape plan decades in the making. "We'll take the pickup truck," she directed, nodding toward an older model Ford with faded paint. "The keys are under the front seat. It belongs to an old friend who owes me a favor." As Brandon filled the truck's tank, Sarah helped Linda transfer their supplies. "There's something you're not telling us," Sarah said quietly, watching her mother's face. "Something about where we're going." Linda paused, her expression unreadable. "The safety deposit box in Chicago contains more than just evidence against Richard's network." "What else?" "Insurance," Linda said simply. "A last resort if everything else fails." Before Sarah could press further, Brandon returned from paying cash for the gas. "We should move." The clerk was asking too many questions. They abandoned the sedan behind the station and continued northward in the pickup. The radio reported unusual police activity near Brandon's estate, a security incident that authorities were investigating. No mention of the 3 people fleeing with evidence that could bring down some of the most powerful men in the state. An hour into their journey, Linda suddenly veered onto a dirt access road, cutting the headlights. "What's wrong?" Brandon asked, instantly alert. "Helicopter." Linda pointed to the distant thrum now becoming audible. "Could be nothing, but we can't risk it." They waited in tense silence as the aircraft passed overhead, its searchlight scanning the main road. Only after the sound faded did Linda ease the truck back onto their route. "They're searching for us actively," she said, her voice tight. "We need to change plans. They'll be watching the highways to Chicago." "What's the alternative?" Sarah asked. "My friend Martha has a lake house about 30 miles from here. We can regroup there. Maybe find another route." The detour took them through increasingly remote terrain, past small lakes dotted with fishing cabins and vacation homes. Linda navigated from memory, taking unmarked turns that seemed indistinguishable from the surrounding forest. "Almost there," she murmured as they bumped down an overgrown driveway. "Martha only uses this place in summer. We should have it too." She slammed on the brakes ahead. Parked in front of a modest cabin was a black SUV with tinted windows. "Back up," Brandon hissed. "Now." Linda threw the truck into reverse, but before she could turn around, the SUV's doors opened. 3 men emerged, weapons visible at their sides. "Drive," Sarah yelled. Linda floored the accelerator, swerving around the SUV in a spray of gravel. Gunshots cracked through the air as bullets pinged against the truck's metal frame. "How did they find us?" Brandon shouted, ducking below window level. "Martha!" Linda gasped, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "They must have her. They must have made her talk." They fishtailed onto the main road. The SUV in close pursuit, Linda drove with reckless precision, taking sharp turns that sent their pursuers sliding. But the truck was old, no match for the powerful vehicle gaining on them. "We can't outrun them," she said grimly. "We need another option." Ahead, the road curved alongside a steep embankment leading down to the lake. Linda's eyes narrowed with decision. "Hold on, this is going to be rough." She jerked the wheel suddenly, sending the truck crashing through the guardrail. For a sickening moment, they were airborne. Then came the impact as they hit the slope, tumbling and rolling toward the water below. Sarah's world became a chaos of noise and pain as she was thrown against her seatbelt. The airbags deployed in a suffocating explosion of white. Through the shattered windshield, she glimpsed trees, sky, and finally the dark surface of the lake rushing toward them. The truck hit the water with a massive splash, the impact momentarily stunning them all. Cold water began pouring in through broken windows. "Get out!" Linda shouted, already struggling with her seatbelt. "Swim for the far shore!" Sarah clutched the butterfly box as water rose around her knees. Brandon was already free, reaching over to help her with her jammed buckle. Together they pushed through the passenger door as the truck began to sink faster. "Mom!" Sarah screamed, realizing Linda wasn't behind them. Brandon dove back toward the driver's side where Linda was still struggling, her leg pinned by the collapsed steering column. The water was now at her chest. "Save the evidence," Linda shouted at them. "Go, I'll follow." "Not without you," Brandon insisted, submerging himself to work at freeing her leg. Sarah treaded water, torn between escaping with their precious evidence and helping her family. In the distance, she could see their pursuers scrambling down the embankment, weapons drawn. "They're coming," she warned. With one final effort, Brandon wrenched Linda free. She surfaced with a gasp, blood streaming from a gash on her forehead. Together, they struck out for the opposite shore, staying low in the water to avoid being seen. A volley of bullets sprayed the lake around them. Sarah ducked beneath the surface, kicking desperately toward a fallen tree that offered some cover. Brandon and Linda followed, moving from shadow to shadow along the shoreline. They emerged finally in a secluded cove, shivering and gasping but alive. In the distance, they could hear their pursuers calling to each other, searching the water's edge. "The box," Linda panted, her eyes fixing on Sarah's hands. "Is it safe?" Sarah nodded, holding up the waterproof container. "Everything's intact." "Good." Linda winced as she examined her injured leg. "Because we're going to need every bit of it now." Brandon scanned the darkening woods. Those weren't regular security contractors. They're professional hunters. Hargrove's elite team, Linda confirmed. "He only uses them when something threatens the entire operation." She looked grim. "He knows what we found." "How?" Sarah demanded. "How could he possibly know about the hidden room? The evidence?" Linda's expression hardened. "Because someone told him. Someone who's been playing both sides for years." "Helen?" Brandon suggested. "No." Linda shook her head. "Helen's loyalty has always been to me and the children. It's someone higher up. Someone with access to everything." As night fell around them, they huddled together for warmth. 3 fragments of a broken family united by danger and terrible truths. The evidence they carried represented both their greatest hope and their greatest threat, proof of monstrous crimes, but also a target painted on their backs. "We need to move soon," Brandon whispered. "Head west through the woods until we hit the county road." Linda nodded, her face pale with pain and determination. "And then Chicago, no matter what." Sarah stared into the darkness, wondering how many more secrets awaited them, and if they would survive long enough to uncover them all. The woods provided temporary sanctuary as they moved west, guided by stars visible through breaks in the canopy. Linda limped between her children, her injured leg growing stiffer with each passing hour. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage Brandon had fashioned from his torn shirt. "We need to stop," Sarah whispered, after Linda stumbled for the 3rd time. "She needs rest." Brandon surveyed their surroundings, then pointed to a dense thicket. "There, we can hide until dawn." They settled into the natural shelter, Brandon using fallen branches to create additional cover. Linda sank to the ground with a barely suppressed groan. "Let me see your leg," Sarah insisted, gently removing the blood-soaked bandage. The wound was deep, a jagged gash where the truck's steering column had pinned her. Without proper medical attention, infection was inevitable. "It's fine," Linda said weakly. "Just needs cleaning." "It needs stitches," Sarah corrected, "and antibiotics." Brandon returned from scouting their perimeter. "I heard vehicles on the road about half a mile west. They're setting up checkpoints." Linda nodded grimly. "Richard's using his connections with local law enforcement. By morning, they'll have an official search underway. Probably something about armed fugitives. Which makes us the criminals," Brandon concluded. They huddled together as the temperature dropped, sharing body heat and whispered plans. The butterfly box, their only hope for vindication, remained clutched tightly in Sarah's arms. "In the safety deposit box," Linda said during a moment of relative clarity. "There's a USB drive with recordings." Charles was paranoid, recorded every meeting in his study, including meetings with his trafficking partners, Brandon guessed. Linda nodded. Years of evidence, names, dates, transactions, everything needed to bring down the entire network. "If we can get to it," Sarah said. "We will." Linda's determination shone through her pain. "Tomorrow, we find transportation, then Chicago." As Linda drifted into fitful sleep, Sarah and Brandon kept watch, sitting back to back at the entrance to their makeshift shelter. "I still can't believe it," Brandon said softly. "Everything I thought I knew about myself, about my purpose, it was all built on lies." "Not all of it," Sarah countered. "The work you've done helping trafficking survivors, that's real. Your compassion is real." Brandon was silent for a long moment. "I keep thinking about all the children in that ledger. How many other families were destroyed like ours?" "Too many," Sarah said. "But that's why we're doing this, for all of them." Dawn broke with disorienting fog that both concealed their position and complicated navigation. Linda's condition had deteriorated overnight, her skin hot with fever, her breathing labored. "We need to get her to a doctor," Sarah insisted. "And lead Hargrove's men straight to us," Brandon challenged. "They'll be watching hospitals, clinics, anywhere we might seek help." "Then what do you suggest?" "We just let her die out here." Before Brandon could respond, a distant sound cut through their argument. Dogs barking, the unmistakable sound of a search party. "They're tracking us," Linda whispered, struggling to sit up. "You both need to go. Take the evidence and leave me." "Not happening," Sarah said firmly. "Listen to me." Linda gripped her daughter's wrist with surprising strength. "I'm slowing you down. The evidence is what matters. It's the only way to stop them permanently." Brandon shook his head. "We're not separating. We'll find another way." The barking grew louder. Linda's eyes filled with desperate urgency. "There is no other way," she insisted. "I've lived with these secrets for 20 years. Let me do this one thing right." Sarah felt tears threatening. "After all this time, you think I'm going to lose you again?" Linda cupped her daughter's face gently. "You never lost me, Sarah, even when we were apart. I was always your mother." Her gaze shifted to include Brandon. "I was always fighting for both of you, in the only ways I could." A branch snapped nearby. Close. Too close. The dogs were closing in. "Go!" Linda urged, pressing a small key into Sarah's hand. Safety deposit box, 247, Chicago Mercantile Bank. Downtown branch. The password for the USB is forgiveness, all lowercase. Brandon looked tortured. Mom, go. Linda pushed him away. I'll lead them in the opposite direction. Buy you time. With a mother's authority that brooked no argument, she forced them into motion. Sarah felt Brandon's hand close around her arm, pulling her away as Linda drew the handgun from her waistband. I love you both, Linda called softly after them. Remember that. They moved swiftly through the fog, the sounds of pursuit temporarily focused on Linda's position. Sarah's chest burned with each breath, with each step that carried her away from her mother. After what felt like miles, they reached the edge of the woods. A county road stretched before them, empty in the early morning light. Now what? Sarah gasped, lungs heaving. Brandon pointed to a small gas station visible in the distance. Civilization. We need a phone, transportation. They approached cautiously. Aware of their disheveled appearance, clothes torn and muddy, Brandon's shirt blood-stained from treating Linda's wound, the station appeared deserted except for a single pickup truck parked near the air pump. Wait here, Brandon instructed, moving toward the building. Sarah crouched behind a dumpster, the butterfly box secured inside her zipped jacket. Minutes stretched endlessly until Brandon returned with a set of keys. Delivery driver left his keys in the ignition, he explained. I left cash on the seat. Probably not enough, but it's something. You stole a truck. Borrowed, Brandon corrected grimly. Under extreme circumstances. They were 50 miles down the highway when they heard the first news bulletin on the radio. Explosion at the lakeside property owned by Martha Kendrick. Authorities report finding one body in the wreckage, believed to be that of Susan Monroe, longtime employee of philanthropist Brandon Ortiz. Ortiz himself is missing, following what police are calling a possible kidnapping attempt. Citizens are advised to be on lookout for. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Mom, she whispered. Brandon's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. She used the gun, not to shoot them, to shoot something that would explode. She sacrificed herself, Sarah said, voice breaking, to give us time, to give us a chance. Brandon corrected. We can't waste it. They drove in grim silence, both processing the likelihood that their mother was dead, found and lost again in the space of days. The butterfly box seemed heavier now, weighted with Linda's sacrifice. Do you think she really died? Sarah asked finally, unable to bear the uncertainty. Brandon's jaw worked. I don't know. The report said, one body, not positively identified. She could have escaped, Sarah said, needing to believe it. Maybe, Brandon conceded, though his tone lacked conviction. As they approached Chicago's outskirts, Brandon pulled into an abandoned warehouse parking lot. They needed to finalize their plan. The bank opens at 9, he said, checking his watch. We have 3 hours. We can't walk in looking like this. Sarah gestured to their filthy clothes. No, Brandon agreed. And we need contingencies. If something happens to one of us, the other needs to know everything. They spent the next hour sharing every detail they'd learned. The ledger codes, the contents of the hidden room, what Linda had told each of them separately, 2 pieces of a puzzle combining to form a clearer picture. If we succeed, Sarah said quietly, what happens next? Brandon stared through the windshield at the distant Chicago skyline. Justice for every child in that ledger, for what they did to our family. And after that, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. After that, we rebuild, together. Whatever comes, Sarah nodded, feeling a fragile hope amid the devastation. Their family, fractured for decades, had briefly reunited only to be torn apart again. But something remained, a bond between siblings forged in shared trauma and determination. For Mom, she said softly. Brandon reached over, squeezing her hand. For Mom. As dawn broke over Chicago, they prepared to make their final move. 2 survivors carrying the weight of countless others, determined that the truth would finally see daylight. 6 months after the Chicago Mercantile Bank security footage captured Sarah and Brandon Coleman entering the downtown branch, the country witnessed what the media dubbed the Ortiz trials. The evidence they recovered that day, detailed financial records, DNA proof of Charles Ortiz's paternity, and most damning of all, years of recorded conversations, had unleashed a legal tsunami that swept through corridors of power across multiple states. Richard Hargrove's arrest on live television became an iconic image. The respected businessman and anti-trafficking advocate led away in handcuffs from his charity gala, stunned benefactors watching in disbelief. Subsequent raids identified 43 accomplices, including 2 judges, a police chief, and a state senator. For Sarah, the victory felt hollow as she stood at the podium, cameras flashing. The newly renovated mansion behind her, once a house of horrors, now transformed into the Coleman Center for Survivors, gleamed in the autumn sunlight. "Today marks new beginnings," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. "This center will provide trauma-informed care, education, legal advocacy, and housing for survivors of trafficking." She paused, allowing her gaze to sweep across the gathered crowd. "What happened in these walls cannot be undone, but we can ensure it never happens again." Brandon joined her at the podium, their sibling resemblance now obvious to anyone looking. The same determined set of their jaws, the same resilience in their eyes. "Our mother, Linda Coleman, isn't here to see this day," Brandon continued where Sarah left off. "We believe she gave her life to protect us and expose the truth. Her sacrifice enabled the dismantling of a trafficking network that operated with impunity for decades. What he didn't mention was their private doubt. The fact that Linda's body, recovered from the explosion site, had been too badly damaged for conclusive identification. The forensic evidence suggested it was her, but a sliver of uncertainty remained, one they discussed only with each other. After the ceremony, as guests toured the facility, Sarah retreated to the quiet office that had once been Charles Ortiz's study. The room had been completely redesigned. Warm colors, comfortable furniture, large windows that eliminated any shadow where secrets could hide. "How are you holding up?" Brandon asked, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. Sarah accepted the mug gratefully. "Better than I expected. Being here doesn't trigger me anymore. It's like we've reclaimed it somehow." "The renovations helped," Brandon said. "Nothing looks the same, except us," Sarah replied with a small smile. "Who would have thought we'd end up working together?" Their tentative reunion had evolved into a powerful partnership. Brandon's business acumen combined with Sarah's first-hand understanding of trauma made the Coleman Center uniquely effective. Together, they'd created something neither could have built alone. A knock at the door interrupted their moment of quiet reflection. Helen entered, her movements slower than 6 months ago, but her eyes still sharp. "The last of the visitors are leaving," she reported, "and that federal agent is here again. Whitaker. Says he has news." Brandon's posture tensed. "Show him in." Agent Whitaker had been their unlikely ally throughout the investigation and trials. Initially skeptical of their incredible story, the recordings from Linda's safety deposit box had quickly convinced him. Since then, he'd worked tirelessly to build airtight cases against Hargrove's network. "Congratulations on the opening," Whitaker said as he entered, declining the offered seat. "I'll keep this brief. We've located another facility. Arizona this time, operational until 3 years ago." Sarah inhaled sharply. "More victims. Records, mostly. We're still piecing it together, but it looks like some children were relocated there when Charles Ortiz died. Richard apparently continued the operation at a reduced scale." "How many?" Brandon asked, his voice tight. "Dozens, potentially. We're working to identify them now." Whitaker shifted, uncomfortable with what came next. "There's something else. Among the records, we found information about a girl who was held here the same time as you. Sarah. Her case number matches the one you mentioned." "Megan," Sarah whispered. Whitaker nodded. "Megan Walsh. According to their records, she escaped during transport. They never recaptured her." Hope fluttered in Sarah's chest. "She really did get away." "More than that," Whitaker continued. "She's alive. We found her. Or rather, she found us after the news broke about the trials. She's been living under an assumed name, working as a prosecutor, specializing in crimes against children." Sarah gripped the edge of her desk, emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Where is she now?" "Outside. Actually, she wanted to see the center. And you, if you're ready." Brandon touched Sarah's shoulder. "You want me to stay?" Sarah shook her head, straightening her spine. No, this one's mine. Whitaker left to bring in their visitor. Sarah moved to the window, watching fallen leaves dance across the lawn where children would soon play in safety. The transformation of this place mirrored her own. Pain repurposed into purpose, trauma into strength. The door opened again. Sarah turned to face a woman with silver-streaked red hair and unmistakable green eyes. Older, certainly, but with the same defiant spark Sarah remembered through the wall of their adjoining cells. "Sarah Coleman," Megan said, her voice catching. "You grew up?" "So did you," Sarah replied, moving forward as if drawn by gravity. "I go by Meredith now, Meredith King. Have for almost 20 years. They stood facing each other, two survivors of the same nightmare, separated by time, but connected by something deeper than their shared past. "You left me clues," Sarah said. "The message in your cell, the key to the butterfly box. You knew I'd come back someday." Meredith, nodded. "I escaped during transport, but I couldn't get you out too. They separated us too quickly. I promised myself that if I survived, I'd leave breadcrumbs for anyone who came looking." Her eyes grew haunted. "I've been hunting them my whole adult life, from inside the system, building cases, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. Were you involved in the investigation before we came forward?" "Peripherally. I couldn't show my hand too early. They had people everywhere." She managed a fierce smile. "But I made sure Agent Whitaker got certain anonymous tips over the years." Brandon returned with coffee for their visitor, and for the next hour they exchanged stories. Meredith's escape and reinvention, her careful vigilance and strategic career choices, all leading to this moment of convergence. "What now?" Sarah asked finally. "After all these years of looking over your shoulder?" Meredith considered the question. "Now I can finally use my real name in court when I prosecute these bastards." Her eyes gleamed with righteous fire. "And help you identify the others who were here. There are still survivors out there who don't know they're finally safe." As evening fell, the three survivors walked the renovated grounds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More survivors to locate, more perpetrators to bring to justice, more healing to facilitate. But tonight, they allowed themselves to acknowledge how far they'd come. "I have something for you," Meredith said. Reaching into her bag, she withdrew a photograph, faded, creased, but recognizable. Two young girls with arms around each other's shoulders, smiling despite the circumstances. "We took this in the back of the transport van. One of the guards was kind, or careless. He let us sit together, gave us candy." Sarah accepted the photo with trembling hands. "I don't remember this. Trauma does that," Meredith said gently. "Fragments the memories. But I remembered for both of us." As they stood there, silhouettes against the sunset, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The center had received dozens of such messages since its opening. Survivors reaching out, seeking connection. She glanced down, expecting another request for information, but the message contained just 5 words that made her blood freeze. "The girl in red lives." Sarah looked up sharply, scanning the gathering darkness beyond the center's gates. For a moment, she thought she glimpsed a figure watching them, a woman with familiar eyes, her hair now completely gray. Then the shape melted into the shadows, leaving Sarah wondering if hope had created an illusion. "What is it?" Brandon asked, noticing her expression. Sarah showed him the message, watching understanding dawn in his eyes. "Could it be?" he whispered. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But I'm going to find out." Meredith looked between them, confused. "Another survivor," Sarah explained. "Someone we thought was lost forever." As they returned to the warmth of the center, Sarah felt something shift within her, the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. Whether the message came from their mother or from another survivor using Linda's code phrase, the effect was the same. The cycle of secrets had been broken. Light had finally penetrated decades of darkness, and in that light, healing, not just for the Coleman siblings, but for all the children whose names had been reduced to initials in a monster's ledger, could finally begin.